Hello, welcome to our live stream. I'm here with Kay Warren, and she's a mental health advocate, author, and co-founder of Saddleback Church. And today we're going to talk about faith, COVID-19, and mental health. Kay, for those who aren't familiar with your work, would you mind giving, in your own words, just a bit about your ministry journey and journey with mental health in particular?
Sure. My husband and I started Saddleback Church 40 years ago. This is our 40th anniversary this year. And in the living room in our condo in Laguna Hills, and with our 4-month-old baby and a couple of college friends. And so we've been here 40 years and love it. Still the best church in the whole world because the people are so great. They're just amazing people. And I did kind of typical things for first 33 years of the church. I taught Bible studies and I worked with kids and I worked with the college ministry and I did some preaching and some teaching. And, I was an HIV advocate for almost a decade, really felt as my kids got older and left the home and I was really available to do some things that I hadn't done before. So I spent about a decade being a global advocate for people living with HIV and for orphans, and talked a little bit about mental health, not a lot. Our youngest son, Matthew, was diagnosed with pretty serious depression when he was 7. Mm-hmm. And then from there, just experienced a whole host of different mental health challenges. But it was pretty private, not because we were ashamed or embarrassed, but it was his life. It was his story. And he was a little boy, and then he was a teenager, and no teenager wants to be the focus, of people's attention. So we kept it kind of quiet, but all like running as background music in the story of our lives was his mental illness that just got worse and worse. Most of his adolescence, he talked about taking his life, talked about killing himself. He just struggled and suffered pretty intensely. And when he was young, of course, as his parent, I had the ability to make sure he went to doctor's visits. I made sure he took his medication. I made sure he was in bed I had a lot of control. And then as, of course, he became of age, I had no control. And so then the next, probably 8 or 9 years of his life were just a roller coaster of sometimes he would take medication, sometimes he wouldn't, sometimes he would be in therapy, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he was doing well, relatively. Other times it just was such a constant, roller coaster. And he changed doctors about 5 years before he died. And that doctor basically threw out everything that he'd been doing, took him off all sorts of medication, and he lost weight. And that was significant to him because some of the medications had caused quite a weight gain. Mm-hmm. And he determined he was never going back on some of those medications and began to work out and just had this, amazingly fit and toned body for a young man. But his mental health was just spiraling, and began to almost daily talk about dying. And so we lived with this agony for so many years, probably the last 5 years of his life, just this agony of watching him suffer. And there was so little as parents that we could do. We felt like we did everything that we knew to do, everything that we could possibly do, anything that he would tolerate us doing, anything that anybody even suggested, and he would cooperate with or felt we tried. But on April 5th, 2013, I say he hit that intractable wall of serious mental illness for the last time, and he took his life. And it was obviously the worst day of my life. There's nothing comes close. I've had cancer, I've had melanoma, I've had breast cancer, I've lost other loved ones, we've had other sadnesses, but there's nothing that comes even close to the death of our son. And, people have said, well, were you surprised? And I'm like, not really, because he spent years telling us that he wanted to die and making attempts. But am I surprised he died that day? Yes. I'm surprised he died that day. We had dinner together. He just bought some new towels. He had a date. A couple of days later, he was going to upgrade his iPhone. He was talking about working out with his trainer, and he was like, man, I'm going to work on these biceps. I'm going to get these biceps. So he had future plans. And yet he went home that day and took his life. So that day, no, I was not expecting it that day. And, you're forever altered when you lose a child. And if you lose a child to suicide, I think it's a crushing catastrophic loss. And it's been 7 years, and time has this way of not mattering. I can hear the sound of his keys as they dropped on the fireplace. I know the sound of that, and I can hear that so clearly as if it were yesterday. And yet it feels like it's been forever since I held him and hugged him and heard his laugh. So time sort of just changes dimensions, I think, in grief. But I knew almost instantly, probably the day he died, that my advocacy was going to shift. Mm-hmm. I had spent a decade with advocating for people with HIV and advocating for people in the faith community to warmly welcome in people with HIV and to adopt the children that were left around the world when their parents died. And so, but I knew I couldn't do both. I knew that my advocacy shifted in that moment from HIV and orphans to mental health, suicide prevention. And that's really what I've done in the last 7 years is just increasingly trying to use my voice, trying to use any platform that I have, any influence that I have, is to speak up for people living with mental illness, their families, do what I can to bring suicide prevention efforts, as many places as I can. So it's not advocacy that I chose per se. I was kind of like thrust into it. Yeah. But it is definitely work that is very meaningful. It's highly meaningful to me. And as I've learned more and more about grief, especially grieving a catastrophic loss of some kind, that one of the ways that we bring some healing even into our hearts is find meaning. Mm-hmm. That it is like it's the griever's quest is to make meaning of the loss. Mm-hmm. And while I can't totally make meaning of Matthew's death, where I can't say, oh, this is why and this is when, and therefore it's okay. I don't know that I'll ever feel that way. That feels actually kind of not even healthy to look at it like that. Sure. But have I found meaning in his death and in bringing hope to other people? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's really hard work, but it's also really good work.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And that's a heartbreaking thing to go through. But I'm so grateful that you've been able to do so much good for other folks struggling with mental health. I know our community is full of folks, particularly struggling with anxiety and depression, especially during this time of COVID-19. So I wanted to just ask you, what in your work have you seen, what are Christians and other faith communities, what kind of struggles are they facing during this pandemic?
Well, I think people living with mental illness are struggling with Christians are facing the same things everybody else is. I mean, every single human being pretty much is facing anxiety and worries about, their job, depression, stress. So many have lost someone to this illness, or there's all the other, what I would call the hidden losses that we talk about, the graduations and the birthdays and the births, and even not even being able to be at funerals. And there's so many losses hidden in the big losses of COVID-19. And I think that those struggles hit everybody, whether you're a person of faith or not a person of faith. If you're a human being alive today, you're going to be experiencing some of those stresses. I really think that from what I've learned is that if we went into this crisis pretty stable, there's a good chance you're going to be stable, when as things begin to lighten up, as things begin to change, as life returns to some sense of normalcy. If you started this crisis in a crisis yourself already, it's just the vulnerable get more vulnerable. And so I would say that I do worry and feel such compassion for anybody who was already having a really hard time. And isolation and the lack of routine and the unpredictability and the uncertainty of the world ahead of us is absolutely a factor in people, how well they're doing.
Yeah.
And so it's a rough time, and I can't tie a pretty bow on it and make it all nice. It's a rough time.
Yeah, and I just want to say for anyone watching, if you are having a difficult time right now, we've dropped the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in the comments. It's also on the screen below. So please do not hesitate to reach out for help if you need it. There's no shame in struggling, and you're not alone, whatever you're facing. So please use that resource if you need it. Awesome. So I wanted to move on.
I was just going to also say, I think, so I don't think I said the word grief in there, but maybe I did, but people are experiencing a lot of grief, not only depression, anxiety, stress, uncertainty, all those things, and actual physical illness, but I mean, just grief. And we don't really know what to do with it. Yes, like I said, there's those smaller losses hidden inside the big one, but none of us really know how to manage grief very well. I think our culture, even in the past, when people wore, black armbands, or they draped black cloth, at least in the United States, on their houses to show that they were in mourning. And there was a certain prescribed period for how long you were supposed to be in mourning. And nobody questioned it. Everybody knew. They saw the black armband. They saw that you were in a black dress. They saw the black on your house. They knew that you were a family in mourning. And so you were treated with some respect, with some, people gave you space, people gave you grace. They understood. With all of that gone, there are no external markings that show, you can walk down the aisle in the grocery store and be walking right next to somebody who is just in deep grief, deep loss, but there's nothing identifiable. And so we're not going to be as gracious with them. We're not going to be as kind. We're not going to be as empathetic. And part of me wishes, maybe there was still some way to identify, because when you're walking through life in grief and you don't really know how to process it, and you don't necessarily have a lot of safe people to process it with, or you don't know what to do with all the emotions that you're feeling, that can be overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. So I think one of the tasks that we have, in the faith community coming up, is to get on top of this the best we can now, because it's not going to get any easier. Yeah. It's just the problem is here. COVID-19 is here. The aftermath is coming. And we can't wait until then to say, oh, I guess we should start talking about how to help people with grief. I think we need to really pay attention to that now, and start getting ready, start being able to help people process all their feelings that they're going to have.
Yeah, this is definitely a traumatic time that we're living through for, there's a spectrum, of course, right. Not knowing how to manage the kind of aftershock of this traumatic experience that we're living through.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
But we don't, I think I know that when my son died and we were just like thrown into this catastrophic grief and loss, sometimes it's really odd, but sometimes people feel ashamed even, or embarrassed. I mean, sometimes there's shame and embarrassment. Like you even already mentioned it. If you said, if you're struggling right now, with depression or anxiety or something else, don't be ashamed. Don't be embarrassed to ask for help. I think grievers, mourners have a little bit of some shame, some embarrassment that, oh, I should be feeling better. It's been 6 months or it's been a year. And people expect me to be who I was, and people expect things to go back to normal. And when they don't, then you start feeling a little bit ashamed, like what's wrong with me that I'm not just bouncing back, or I'm just not rallying. And I just really want to say to anybody who's experiencing grief right now or been experiencing it for a while, there is no shame in grief. Grief is actually good for us. My husband says that grief is how we make the transitions in life. Almost any time we make a transition, there's a little bit of grief also associated, even if it's a good transition. You move to a new house, but you also have to leave a place maybe that you've loved for a certain amount of time. So grief is inherent in even our good changes. And when some of the changes that are happening are mostly painful, then there's a lot of grief. But it is grief that's navigated well and in a healthy way actually help us transition. Yeah. And so no shame, no embarrassment in experiencing grief for longer than what other people might think is an okay amount of time.
Yeah, especially if like what you're grieving is like a relatively like small thing. Like if you missed out on your graduation, or you're not going to enter college the way that you anticipated on campus, stuff like that is important too. And it's okay to grieve those things as well.
It absolutely is. And I think that we make a mistake when we compare griefs, classify them, and say, well, your grief is that. You should have my grief. Yeah. And act like whatever we're going through is, that nobody dare have anything worse than what we're going through. And we can, I think adults do that to kids and to students pretty regularly. How many times have you heard parents, or maybe your parents or something, or maybe I did at some point, say, oh, come on, that's not that big a deal. When the kid is feeling sad or depressed, or somebody's upset that they didn't get to go to prom, or that their college they're freshmen and it's going to be an online experience when they were so looking forward to that. And to minimize grief like that is actually unkind. And we really need to be careful and not compare grief, not measure whose is worse, but to honor it in each person, validate it, hear it, listen to it. That's how we move through it, not by having to say, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I felt that way. I shouldn't feel that. I shouldn't feel bad, but I do feel bad. And we hide it.
I like stuff it down. It doesn't go away.
Grief will catch up with you. That's the thing. Grief will hunt you down. Grief will find you. And it may not express itself immediately, but it will show up in other ways. That's why it's not good to ever make anybody feel ashamed for how they're feeling, the feelings of sadness and loss that they have.
Yes, definitely. So the next question we wanted to discuss were, how can Christians invite God and their church communities into their mental health struggles if they're struggling during this pandemic?
Yeah, it's a little challenging to start new programs and things in the middle of COVID-19, but it's not impossible. And there are so many different groups and organizations and faith communities who have rallied to this and have put a lot of their, not just their worship services, but like their small groups or their support groups are actually online. And there are podcasts and webinars, and you could spend all day if you're working from home, you could spend all day just attending all the free webinars and podcasts that are out there that are springing up, trying to deal with, this new reality that we're living with. And I would say take advantage of them, because there are churches and there are faith groups and there are mental health groups who are providing great online information and tips. And even if it was the same thing that you heard last week, you need it again this week, so I don't think we can get enough of how do you take care of yourself in this time? What are the things that will help build resilience? What are the things that will increase your sense of well-being? What is it that your church or faith community offers that can help with that resilience? Take advantage of every little bit of it. And if there are opportunities to serve, that is sometimes an overlooked way to deal with our own struggles, is to give back. Yeah. We tend to think, well, I can't give back right now because I'm hurting, because I'm struggling, because I don't have anything financially to give. If you have 50 cents and you can buy a can of soup for somebody, do it. You don't have to give the Bill Gates, bazillions of dollars to feel like you're making a contribution. If you have something as tiny as, seriously, you could buy a neighbor a bagel, or you could buy somebody a can of soup. It doesn't really matter. It's the fact that you are moving outside of yourself, turning your eyes, because that's what we do when we're feeling bad, is we turn our whole focus almost within. How am I feeling? How am I doing? What's it like for me? I realize I don't even know that you're hurting because I'm so absorbed with my own. And even if it's just for 30 minutes, to move outside of yourself and give something of yourself, in both financially or service, find a place to volunteer and donate. If it's safe for you to do, then please do it, because it is, every church, every faith community needs volunteers right now. There's people that need to be fed. There's meals that need to be delivered. There are people who need errands run. There are people who need somebody just to stop by on their porch and say, I'm another human being here to tell you that you are not alone in the world. I see you. I'm here with you. We're voice to voice. So many ways to go ahead and serve. And I can't encourage that highly enough.
Yeah, and even like something as simple as a text can go along.
Absolutely. I learned this recently, and all the things I've been trying to learn during this time, speaking of trying to learn things, is that we have a misperception that to really make a difference in somebody else's life, we have to call and talk to them for an hour, or we have to give them 3 hours of our time, when actually research has shown that a minute or two, it could be a call that is actually 2 minutes long, or a text that isn't necessarily going through everything on in your life, but it's a text that just says, hey, thinking about you today. What's up? How you doing? You're on my mind. Hey, I love you, or hope you're doing well. It doesn't have to be anything major. It can just be those tiny little touch points that can make the difference for somebody else in how they do on any given day. Yeah,
that's it. I didn't actually know that, but it makes so much sense. Awesome.
And sometimes we hold back from doing it because we think, I don't have an hour. I don't have 3 hours to do that. But do you have a minute?
Yeah.
2 minutes?
Yeah. And also making use of, if you're able to, any kind of face-to-face contact, obviously from a distance, but sometimes there's a lot of Zoom fatigue, and just being on all video calls, going on maybe a social distancing kind of walk, like that can be really helpful as well.
Yeah. I think we're all inspired. I just remember when Italy was in the height of the COVID-19, and we were all inspired by these, videos of people who were standing out on their balconies, singing to somebody else across the road, singing to each other. It was, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it, just because it was so human.
Yeah.
It was so human. It was so kind. It was, it was not letting the barrier of a virus, or even being across the street, or I can't be with you, therefore I'll do nothing. It's like, what can I do with what I have right now that expresses kindness and generosity of spirit and shared humanity? Those are, we have to take advantage of those. We have to, because we're all dependent upon each other for that.
Definitely. So in that kind of vein, are there online groups you recommend in particular for people that want to connect?
Yes, absolutely. There's 2 different types of group. One is, it's called, I'm really a big fan of something called Celebrate Recovery. And Celebrate Recovery is a Christian 12-step program that started at our church 30 years ago. And there's 7 million people in the world who've gone through it. So it's not just a little tiny thing, but it is hurts, habits, and hangups. It's sometimes when we think of recovery, we think, well, I don't have a substance misuse disorder, or I don't drink too much, or I'm not in a codependent relationship, or I don't shop too much, or whatever you fill in the blank, say, I don't do that, therefore recovery is not for me. But actually, when you think of it, we all have habits, and we all have hurts, and we all have hangups, and we could use somebody else's support to help get through them. So Celebrate Recovery, if somebody wanted to go to celebraterecovery.com, there are online groups right now that are called Celebrate Recovery COVID Response. So they're CR.
Oh, wow.
And you can join those at any time. There's a locator at celebraterecovery.com. There's a locator. You could find an online group near you. Highly recommend it. And then just particularly mental health support groups. There's one called Grace Alliance Groups, and that's at mentalhealthgracealliance.org. And they have online groups both for families and for individuals who might be, living with a mental illness, and highly recommend those. Another one's called Fresh Hope, which has been particularly aimed at people living with bipolar disorder. And that, but they meet online and they have groups all over, and they're freshhope.us. And you could find an online group there too. So those are like a recovery group that I would recommend, and then 2 different mental health support groups, and then something that has just exploded during the time of COVID-19 are online counseling groups. I mean, online counselors. One site that comes very highly recommended is betterhelp.com.
Yeah, they're one of our partners, actually.
Oh, good. So you're aware of them, and your audience is probably aware of them as well. But as insurance companies have loosened up that ability for people to get telemedicine and get telecounseling, that's been great. But they're low cost, compared to even what you might pay with your out-of-pocket cost for an insurance. But yeah, those are just 3 or 4 that I would recommend right off the bat.
Awesome. And so for anyone watching, we've placed links for all of those organizations and online support groups in the comments, so you can check them out. I also actually used to lead a mental health Grace Alliance support group.
Oh.
They're really great.
Okay, good.
Awesome. So let's see. Our next question is kind of going back to scripture. Do you have any go-to verses you revisit for encouragement in times of hardship?
I do. Just yesterday, seriously, yesterday was a hard day. My mother died this spring, right ahead of COVID-19. She died of Alzheimer's, been ill for a long, long time. And then it's the anniversary, always around Easter is Matthew's anniversary. And then my daughter and her husband and grandkids are moving out of the area. I've lived next to them my whole lives, and they're moving in 26 days. And so the grief with my mom, Matthew's anniversary is always the spring is always a painful reminder. My daughter is moving, and then there's COVID-19. I've also, as I said, been in isolation. I think I told you before we started that I've been pretty much in isolation since the end of February. And so it just was really weighing on me. And yesterday I got up and I was journaling, and it was a pretty bleak little journal entry that I was writing, just about, I was kind of mad at God. I was tired of all this. I wanted life. I want my life back. I don't want to deal with all of this. And, kind of like, God, where are you? I know you care about me, but I don't know. I was just having a really rough day. Yeah. And I was reading a little devotional book that I've read for a long time, My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers, that I've read almost every day for about 20 years. And in that little devotional book yesterday, it mentioned Romans 8. And I thought, that's a great chapter. I'm going to go read Romans 8. So I plowed through Romans 8 yesterday. I have a new Bible because I need large print because the eyes don't work the way they used to. So this was my first time to go through Romans 8 in this new Bible. Nice. You can see I kind of colored it up pretty good because everything in it was just so reassuring, so powerful. Just a couple of the verses, starting in verse 31, the Apostle Paul says, "What can we say about such wonderful things as this? If God is for us, who can ever be against us? Since God did not even spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, won't God, who gave us Christ, also give us everything else?" And then he asks this question that was on my heart yesterday: can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity, or are persecuted, or are hungry or cold, or in danger, or threatened with death? He says, no, despite all these things, Overwhelming victory is ours through Christ, who loved us. And I'm convinced that nothing can ever separate us from his love. Death can't, and life can't. The angels can't, and the demons can't. Our fears for today, our worries about tomorrow, and even the powers of hell cannot keep God's love away. So whether we're high above the sky or in the deepest ocean, nothing in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus, our Lord. And I went back to my journal and I kind of went, take two, do over. And I just wrote in really big letters, he loves me.
Yeah. That's really powerful.
The word of God is, it just gives me something that nobody else can give me. I love talking to other people. I love getting comfort from friends. I love sharing deep things with, others who are willing to kind of go there, but there's just nothing quite like God's word for me. So that's one of my favorite passages, Romans 8. I also love Deuteronomy 33:27. That's been one of my favorite go-tos all my whole life. And it just says, the eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. And that the day that Matthew died and I fell to the ground, all the days since then where grief has taken me to the ground, all the days that are ahead of me in my life. I don't know what's ahead of me, but there will be days ahead of me, I'm sure, where I'm going to go to my knees one more time for something else, to know that underneath the ground holding me up is God's everlasting arms. That gets me up. I can keep living. I can keep going. I can keep facing whatever is ahead. I don't know what it is. I don't. But I do know that underneath whatever, anytime my knees hit the ground, God is going to be underneath to catch me, to hold me, pick me up. I'll never be left alone, ever.
That's so beautiful. I have chills. Yeah. And I feel like also the Psalms are really great to read through in this time. If you're kind of looking for bite-sized stuff,
yes,
this can be great.
I love Psalm 91. If somebody's saying, great, what's a Psalm to read? Psalm 91. I actually had written that down too, because I love that, because there the psalmist says that God alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I'm trusting him. And then this is the part that I think is particularly applicable. It says, do not be afraid of the terrors of the night, nor fear the dangers of the day, nor dread the plague that strikes in the darkness, nor the disaster that strikes at midday. Do not be afraid. No evil will conquer you. And when you call on me, I will answer, and I will be with you in trouble, and I will rescue you and honor you, and I will satisfy you with a long life and give you my salvation. Again, Psalm 91 is just a beautiful one, particularly, I think, in COVID-19, because it talks about the fear. Isn't that, for me, that's when I sometimes feel the most afraid, is at night. I might do okay during the day. Seriously, I might do okay. I've got work, Zoom calls, I've got stuff I'm writing, I've got work to do. But sometimes when my head hits the pillow, everything is quiet, but my brain is alive with noise, with thoughts, with anxiety, with the what ifs, and to have verses that say, but in the night, in the night, he is there. And in the night, he is my refuge. And in the night, he's my place of safety. Those verses are particularly meaningful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing all those things. And feel free, if you're in the comments, to let us know what verses and passages really speak to you when you're struggling. Great. So I'd love to kind of just wrap up with, we've kind of talked about this already, but trusting God in the face of adversity can be really difficult. What kind of last word of encouragement would you offer someone who's really struggling right now?
Use this time to send your spiritual roots deep into the goodness of God. The way that I was able to survive and thrive and say that life is good again after the death of my son is because I spent over 50 years sending my spiritual roots deep into the love and the goodness. I trust in the goodness of God for things that I don't even understand. I don't understand my son's death. I never will. but I believe in a good God. And so when Matthew died and that experience kind of like tugged on the tree of my faith, the roots held. And today, as we're living through this COVID-19 experience, and there are so many tragedies, so many losses, so many stressful things, so many things that are very hard to understand. If you've got some deep roots in God, they can hold. And you might say, I don't even know that I really believe in God, or I don't really know that much about him. I don't even know what you're talking about when you talk about spiritual roots. I'm just saying, seek him. Seek him. And every time you do, every time I read one of those passages that assures me that even if my knees hit the ground, God is going to be there to catch me. Even if I read those verses that say he'll be with me in the night, or that nothing can separate. Every time I believe that, it's sending my spiritual roots into him, so that my life, so that ultimately I can't be shaken. And so it's never too late to start developing spiritual roots. Use this time. Read the Bible, get a modern translation. Look at the YouVersion. It's an app on your phone. YouVersion is a great app that has all sorts of like reading plans for the Bible, or devotionals, or just it's incredible. If you don't have a Bible, download YouVersion on your phone, and really spend some time getting to know God, so that your spiritual roots will hold no matter what externally happens to you. There's nothing worse than feeling like the ground beneath your feet is shaking. It's terrible to feel unmoored, to feel unsteady. And people who really focus on trusting in the goodness of God, not that everything is good, because it's not. That's not what I'm saying, but that he is good. Then when all the external things shake us, threaten to pull everything out from underneath us, our roots are going to hold strong. We will be strong not only for ourselves, but for other people who might really, really be having a hard time. So spend this time of COVID-19. Take this intentional moments to start building a spiritual set of roots that will see you in good stead for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I love that. Having the spiritual roots to take with you into any other hardship moving forward in your life. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for chatting today, Kay. We really appreciate it.
It's good to talk with you, Juliette. Good to be with you and your audience.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Have a great day.
Thank you.